She told me she was leaving on a Tuesday, just like that. Over dinner. She put down her fork, looked me directly in the eyes, and said the words I had been quietly, carefully preparing for. Not because I feared them, because I had planned for exactly this moment. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't beg, I didn't reach across the table and grab her arm. I didn't do any of the things a man is supposed to do when the woman sitting across from him tells him she's done. I just looked at her. I picked up my wine glass, I took a slow, deliberate sip, and I smiled. She didn't expect that. Nobody ever does. People think power is loud. They believe control looks like anger. A fist on a table, a voice that rises to fill the room, threats whispered in the dark. They are wrong. They have always been wrong. Real power is always the quietest thing in the room. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to perform. It simply exists, and everything around it adjusts accordingly. I set the glass down gently, made sure it barely made a sound against the marble, and I said, "Okay, tell me why." Not because I wanted to understand her feelings. I already understood her better than she would ever understand herself. I asked because I needed her talking. Because the moment a person starts explaining themselves, they reveal everything. Every crack, every fear, every door they left unlocked. The moment she started explaining herself to me, she handed me the keys to the very thing she was trying to protect. And she didn't even know she'd done it. She said she felt suffocated. She said she needed space. She said she hadn't felt like herself in months. She said she felt like she was disappearing. Her voice was trembling, but her eyes were certain. Or at least, she believed they were. Every word she said was a thread, and I was collecting every single one of them, winding them carefully around my fingers, building something she couldn't see yet. I nodded slowly. I let the silence stretch between us like something alive. I let her sit in it. I let her feel the full weight of what she'd just said. Let the air in the room go still and heavy. And then very calmly, very quietly, I said, "You're right. I haven't been present enough for you lately. I've been so focused on everything else that I stopped paying attention to you. And that's my failure, not yours." She blinked. That was not what she expected. She had come to this dinner armed for a war. She had rehearsed this conversation, I could tell. She had written herself a script in her head. What she would say, how I would react, what she would say back. She had prepared herself for my anger, for my coldness, for my silence, for my manipulation. But I gave her none of those things. I gave her something far more disarming. I gave her an apology. Here's what most men never truly understand. And this is the thing I've known since I was young. The thing that has served me better than anything else I've ever learned. When a woman says she wants to leave, she is not asking for permission. She is not delivering a verdict. She is asking for a reason to stay. She is holding a door open and waiting to see what walks through it. The difference between understanding that and not understanding it is the difference between keeping her and losing her. It is the entire game, the whole architecture of the thing. I reached across the table. I touched her hand. Not grabbing. I never grab. Not holding. I never hold, just touching. The tips of my fingers on the back of her hand. A quiet, deliberate, perfectly calibrated reminder that I was still right there. That I was present now, right now, in this exact moment. For her, I watched her breath change. "I don't want to lose you," I said. And I looked at her when I said it. Not at the table, not at the wall. Directly at her eyes. I let the words sit between us in the air, and in that moment I meant it. I meant it deeply. Not in the way she thought I meant it. Not with whatever softness she was hearing in those words. I meant it the way a man means it when he looks at something he has carefully, methodically built from nothing. something that took time and patience and precision, and simply refuses to watch it walk out the door. She started to cry, not the sharp, angry crying of a woman who has made up her mind, the slow, collapsing kind, the kind that means a decision is dissolving. That was the moment I knew with complete certainty that she was still mine. I let her talk. That's the part nobody understands about this. You have to let them talk. You have to create the space. Most men panic at this point. They either shut down or they start defending themselves, arguing, explaining, counter-accusing. They make the conversation about themselves. That is the wrong move. Always. Because when you argue, you give her something to push against. You give her friction. Friction creates momentum, and momentum is exactly what she needs to actually leave. Instead, I gave her nothing to push against. I became soft ground. And when you walk onto soft ground, you don't move forward. You sink. I let her talk for another full hour. I listened like it was the most important conversation I had ever had in my life. I gave her my full, undivided attention. I made eye contact. I leaned in. I asked questions, not challenging questions, not deflecting questions, but the kind of questions that made her feel seen. The kind that said, without saying anything, I am hearing every word. You matter to me. You have always mattered. And then slowly, methodically, almost imperceptibly, I began to do the real work. I began to reframe, not aggressively, not obviously, word by word, sentence by sentence. I started to gently, carefully, almost lovingly shift the meaning of everything she had told me. The suffocation she described became, in my retelling, the depth of my devotion to her. I wasn't controlling, I was attentive, I was present. I gave her more of myself than I had ever given anyone. Did she understand what that meant? Did she understand how rare that was? Most men disappear into their work, into their phones, into their silence. I was there. I was always there. And somehow she had mistaken that for pressure. The control she had felt became, in my retelling, protection. I made decisions for her not because I didn't trust her, but because I wanted to carry the weight so she didn't have to. Because I saw a woman who had spent her whole life having to figure everything out alone, having to fight for everything she had, having to be strong for everyone around her. And I wanted to be the one thing in her life that just handled it. The one thing she didn't have to fight, the distance she'd been feeling, that hollow, disconnected feeling she'd described, that slow erosion of herself that became in my hands something she had done, not to me, to herself, because she was afraid, because real intimacy terrified her, because every time we got close enough for it to be real, she pulled back. And I had been patient with that. I had waited. But her fear was her own to reckon with, not mine to solve. I watched her face while I talked. I watched the confusion set in, the way her certainty started to buckle. I watched her begin to doubt the narrative she had walked in with. She had been so sure 20 minutes ago. Now she wasn't sure of anything at all. That's the thing about certainty. It's only as strong as the story beneath it. Change the story and the certainty collapses like a structure with no foundation. By the end of the night, she was no longer leaving. She was apologizing. That is the moment I will never forget. She looked up at me with wet, exhausted eyes. Her mascara tracked down her face, and she told me she was sorry. Sorry for even thinking about it. Sorry for the things she had said. She was confused, she told me. She had been so in her head lately, so overwhelmed, and she had taken it out on us, on me, on what we had built together. I told her I understood. I told her I wasn't angry. I told her I wasn't going anywhere. I reached across and wiped the mascara from her cheek with my thumb, slowly. She closed her eyes when I did it. And I meant what I said. I was not going anywhere. Let me be very clear about something, because this is important and I want you to understand it fully. I did not keep her through cruelty. I kept her through precision. There is a difference, and it matters enormously. Cruelty is blunt, it is loud, it leaves marks. And it drives people away eventually, no matter how afraid they are. Cruelty is amateur. What I used was something else entirely. Something that requires patience, intelligence, and an absolute understanding of how human beings are built, how they think, how they feel, how they make decisions, and how those decisions can be quietly, invisibly redirected. People are not as free as they believe they are. That is a hard truth, but it is the truth. Every choice a person makes is shaped by their history, their fears, their desires, their wounds. You do not have to force someone to stay. You simply have to understand what they need deeply enough to become it. To give them not what they ask for, but what they're actually hungry for underneath the asking. And then you become irreplaceable. Not because they cannot find someone else, but because leaving you would mean losing the version of themselves they only exist as when they are with you. I had been building that for her for a long time before that Tuesday. It started early, the way it always does. In the beginning, I gave her everything. My time, my attention, my stories, my interest. I made her feel like the only person in any room we were ever in together. I noticed things about her that no one else had ever noticed. The way she held her coffee cup with both hands, even in warm rooms. The specific kind of sad that lived in her eyes when she talked about her sister. The way her laugh changed pitch when she was nervous versus when she was genuinely delighted. I cataloged her. I studied her the way you study something you intend to keep. And she felt it. She felt seen in a way she had never been seen before. That is the most powerful drug there is. To be truly, completely seen by another person. People will do almost anything to keep that feeling. They will give up enormous things for it. They will explain away enormous things for it. I gave her that feeling early, and I gave it to her consistently, and then, gradually, carefully, I began to shift the source of it, so that the feeling of being seen was no longer something she had in the world. It was something she only had with me. And the moment I did that, the architecture was in place. That's the part I called architecture, not a metaphor, an accurate description. Because you do build it. You build it the way an architect designs a space, with intention, with patience, with an understanding of how people move through rooms and what makes them stay. You place the walls where they need to go, and you make sure the walls are beautiful. You fill the space with warmth and comfort and the particular kind of belonging that a person has always wanted and never quite found. And by the time they look up and notice there are no windows, they've already decided it's home. She stayed that night, and the night after, and all the nights that followed. And the strange thing, the thing I did not entirely anticipate, though I should have, is that she became more herself after that, not less. The woman who had sat across from me 3 months earlier with wet eyes and trembling hands and something that looked like resolve. That woman had been fighting for something she thought she needed. And I had given her something better to need instead. Or so she believed. She began to settle. She stopped questioning. She filled the space with small rituals. Her books on my bookshelves, her running shoes by my door, her particular brand of tea in my kitchen cabinet. She made herself at home in my life the way people do when they've finally decided to stay somewhere. And she was happy in that settling. Genuinely, I think. Happy in the way that people are happy when they've stopped struggling. That's the part that some people would call sad. I don't. I call it resolution. I never asked her to stop being herself. I never needed her to disappear. I needed her to be herself within the space I had designed. And that is exactly what she did. She was fully herself. Her laughter, her mind, her warmth, her particular way of moving through the world. All of it fully intact. just oriented now around a center that was me. There were other moments after that Tuesday, smaller ones. Brief flickers of resistance, of restlessness, like someone turning over in their sleep. A withdrawn weekend, a few quiet days, a pointed comment here and there that had the shape of a door opening. And each time, I handled it, calmly, efficiently, without drama. I had the tools now. I knew exactly which thread to pull and how hard, and every time she came back. Every time it was her idea. That last part is important. It always has to be her idea. If she comes back because you chased her, you've lost. If she comes back because she chose to, because she missed you, because whatever she thought she needed elsewhere turned out to be less than what she already had, then you have won something durable. I never chased her. I never once let her see me sweat. But late at night, sometimes I think about that Tuesday. The way she looked across that table. The particular clarity in her eyes in the moment before I smiled. Before my smile changed something in her. There was something in those eyes that was completely unclouded. Something sure. Something that for just a few seconds was fully and entirely hers. I don't think about it with regret. I don't experience regret in the way I understand most people do. That particular ache, that backwards longing. I think about it with something closer to appreciation. The way a chess player appreciates a beautifully designed opening. The moment she said the words, the moment she made the move, it was a good move, a strong move. And the response it required from me was exactly the kind of work I do best. Sometimes late at night, I catch her watching me from across the room. Something behind her eyes that I cannot quite name. Something that looks almost like recognition. Like a person standing at a window they cannot open, looking out at a view they have learned to love. And I think to myself, maybe she knows. Maybe somewhere beneath everything she has always known. Maybe there is a version of this story she has told herself in the very quiet of her own mind. A story closer to the truth than the one she tells everyone else. Maybe she is smarter than I have given her credit for. Maybe she has chosen this fully and knowingly, the way a person chooses to stay in a city they could leave, because the city has become necessary to them, but knowing changes nothing. That is the real secret. The one thing I have learned with absolute certainty over all these years, all these rooms, all these dinners and conversations and carefully placed silences. A person can see the cage with perfect crystalline clarity and still choose to remain inside. Because the cage is warm. Because the cage is familiar. Because outside the cage is something uncertain and cold and entirely unknown. And because I gave her something far more powerful than the desire to leave. I gave her the feeling of being chosen, of being specifically, deliberately, completely chosen by someone who could have chosen anyone. Someone who saw everything, all of it, the softness and the damage and the difficult places, and chose her anyway. That is the thing that keeps people, not chains. Not walls, not fear, the belief that they are chosen. And that belief, once planted, grows into something that fills every room. She is still here. Of course she is still here. And on Tuesday nights we have dinner at that same table with those same candles. And she puts down her fork and looks at me, and sometimes she smiles like she is holding a private thought just behind her eyes. And I smile back, and neither of us says anything about it. Because there is nothing to say. The story is already written. The architecture is complete, and we both live here now, in the home that I built, with the walls that she cannot see under a sky that I made her believe she chose. And that, in the end, is all any of us truly want, to believe that we chose the life we're in. Even when someone else made the choice for us. There is something I have never told anyone. something I have turned over in my mind many times but never said out loud, not to a friend, not to a therapist. I have never had much use for therapists, and certainly not to her. But here, like this, in the specific privacy of this confession, I will tell it. I almost let her go, not because I wanted to, not because I had changed my mind or grown some sudden conscience, but because in the moment she said the words, in that exact second before I picked up the wine glass and before I arranged my face into the expression I needed, there was a part of me, a very small and deeply buried part that felt something I was not prepared for, something I could not immediately name or categorize or place. I think it was the look in her eyes. She had been building up to that conversation for weeks. I knew that. I had watched the signs accumulate, the slightly longer pauses before she answered me, the mornings she woke up and stared at the ceiling instead of turning toward me, the way her body had begun to hold a tension I could feel even across a room. I am very good at reading people. I have spent most of my life developing and refining that particular skill, and I knew what I was watching even as it was happening. I tracked it with the same calm attention I give to everything that matters to me. But I had calculated, based on everything I knew about her, that she would need another 3 or 4 weeks before she would be able to say the words. I had a plan for when she reached that point. A very precise, very carefully considered plan. And then on a Tuesday, without warning, she said them 3 weeks early. And for a fraction of a second, I mean this literally, a fraction of a second, something measured not in minutes but in a single heartbeat, I was caught without my armor on. And in that fraction of a second, I saw her face clearly. Not the way I usually see her, which is as a collection of variables, a system I have learned to navigate. I saw her face the way you see a person when you forget just for a moment to protect yourself from seeing them. She looked exhausted, not tired in the ordinary way. Exhausted at a level that lives somewhere deeper than sleep can reach. Like a person who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has finally decided to set it down. And the thing I felt in that fraction of a second, the thing I have turned over and examined many times since, was not guilt. I want to be precise about this because precision matters to me. It was not guilt and it was not love in any form I recognize. It was something older and quieter than either of those things. It was the specific sensation of looking at the full weight of what you have done to someone and for just a moment seeing it clearly. And then the moment passed. I picked up the glass, I smiled, and I went to work. I have thought about that moment many times. What it means that I felt it, what it means that I chose to disregard it. Whether those two things say something about who I am or simply confirm what I already know about myself. I don't lose sleep over it. I want to be clear about that. I am not the kind of man who loses sleep over the choices he has made, but I do think about it in the same way I think about any interesting problem, with genuine intellectual curiosity, with the same remove and rigor I would apply to anything else worth understanding. What I keep returning to is this: the fact that I felt something in that moment does not change anything I did afterward. It does not make what I did wrong. It does not retroactively give her anything she didn't already have. I kept her. She is here. She is, by any observable measure, content. She has a life that most women would envy. Security, comfort, a man who is reliably and completely present. She has someone who chose her. And she knows, in the way that people know things they have decided not to examine too closely, that she is protected. The cost of that protection is something she has chosen not to name. People do that all the time. They make choices and then they choose not to name the choices they've made because naming a thing means being accountable to it, and accountability is uncomfortable. She is not unusual in that. She is deeply, profoundly human. The question I find more interesting is a different one entirely, and it's this: did I love her? I use the word carefully because I use all words carefully. I have noticed that people throw that particular word around with extraordinary looseness, applying it to everything from their children to their preferred brand of coffee, which has always struck me as a kind of poverty of language. When I use a word, I mean it specifically. And so I want to be specific now. I don't know. That is the honest answer, and I am committed to honesty in these moments, whatever you might think of me. I don't know if what I experience is what other people mean when they use that word. I know that I wanted her in a way I haven't wanted many people. Not in the ordinary physical sense, though that was part of it, but in the complete sense. I wanted her presence. I wanted to be in rooms with her. I wanted to know what she was thinking and feeling, not only so I could use that knowledge, but also because she was interesting to me. She surprised me on occasion, which very few people manage to do. Is that love? Maybe. Maybe it is the version of love I am capable of. Maybe love for someone like me looks different from the outside than it does for other people. Maybe the cage I built for her is also the only way I know how to hold something I don't want to lose. I have sat with that possibility. I have not resolved it. What I know with certainty is this: the night she tried to leave was the most important night of our relationship, because it was the first time she was fully, completely real to me. Not as a project, not as a person to be understood and navigated, but as someone with an independent will that was capable of moving away from me. And the discovery of that, the discovery that she could go, that she had the capacity to go, that she was sitting across from me with her fork on the table saying the words. That was the moment I knew I wanted her in a way that required action, not desire, action. There is a difference. Desire is passive. It watches. Action decides. And I decided the mechanics of the thing I have already described. The reframing, the silence, the touch, the apology that was and wasn't an apology. Those were the instruments I used, and I used them well. But what I want to explain now, because I think it is the more interesting part, is the longer work, the architecture as I have called it. Because that Tuesday night was only one night, and what I built with her was built over a much longer time than one night. I started, as I always do, with attention. There is no more powerful gift you can give another human being than your complete and genuine attention. Not performed attention. People can feel the difference, real attention. The kind that notices small things and remembers them. The kind that is present in the room without performing presence. She had spent her life with people who were half somewhere else. Parents absorbed in their own complications, friends who listened with one ear while composing their own responses, partners who looked at their phones in restaurants. She had spent her life feeling like a figure in the background of other people's stories. I made her the center of mine, not immediately. Immediately would have felt like too much, and too much becomes pressure. I did it gradually, in the way that sunrise is gradual. You don't notice the transition, only the result. I asked her questions and then actually listened to the answers. I referenced things she had told me 3 conversations ago. I noticed when her mood shifted and named it accurately, not obtrusively, just enough for her to feel caught, seen, not observed. There is a difference, but genuinely seen. That was the foundation. The second layer was exclusivity. I made her feel that what existed between us was singular, that the way I was with her was not the way I was with other people. This was not entirely untrue. I am not the same with everyone. But I cultivated the sense of it deliberately. A kind of shorthand between us, references and rituals and small private things that belonged only to us. The particular way I made her coffee in the morning. She had mentioned once offhandedly how she liked it, and I had never made it any other way since. She noticed that. Of course she noticed. That is exactly the kind of thing she had spent her life waiting for someone to do. When you make someone feel irreplaceable in your life, they begin to believe they are irreplaceable. And when they believe it, they begin to behave as if it is true. They build their identity around it. They make plans that assume it. They stop imagining alternative lives, not because you've forbidden it, but because the alternative seems flat and impoverished compared to this. The third layer was strategic vulnerability. This is the one that most people do not understand and therefore do not use effectively. People assume that control requires impenetrability, that you maintain power by never showing weakness. That is a beginner's understanding. The truth is more sophisticated. Controlled vulnerability is one of the most powerful tools available. When you allow someone to see a carefully selected piece of your pain, your fear, your private struggle, when you trust them with something you appear to trust no one else with, they feel chosen. They feel special. They feel responsible for that trust, which creates obligation, which creates bond. I showed her things, pieces of myself that I chose very deliberately. My relationship with my father. That was a useful one. The professional failure I had experienced in my 30s, the period when I had lost something I had worked very hard to build. I showed her those things with what appeared to be difficulty, with the particular reluctance of a person who does not often show such things. And she received them with enormous care, enormous tenderness. She held those pieces of me as if they were fragile, and in holding them, she became connected to me in a way that ran deeper than desire. She became someone who was holding a piece of me, and people do not easily abandon things they are holding. Over the months that followed that Tuesday, I watched her relationship to our life together change, not dramatically. There was no single moment of transformation, no visible shift. Just a slow settling, a gradual quieting of the restlessness I had always felt just below her surface. The books she began keeping at my apartment, the decisions she started deferring to me, not because I demanded it, but because I had made myself the person she trusted most. The way she started referring to future plans as if I was a fixed constant in them, a given, not a question. She had stopped questioning. That is the purest form of it, I think. When someone stops questioning, not because they are afraid to, but because it no longer occurs to them to. When the relationship has become so fully the architecture of their daily life that leaving would require rebuilding everything from scratch. All the habits, all the rhythms, all the small certainties. When the very effort of leaving becomes more imaginable as an abstract idea than as a practical reality. She is there now. She has been there for a while. There is a particular quality to the silence we share these days that I have come to think of as not peace exactly, but resolution. The tension of that Tuesday is gone. What replaced it is something stable and, I think, genuine. What we have now is real in all the ways that matter practically, regardless of how it was built. I am aware that there are people who would look at what I have described and call it by a different name than I would. People who would say I stole something from her, that I took away a choice she was in the process of making freely and replaced it with an outcome I had decided on. People who would say that the home I built is not a home at all, and that the love she thinks she feels was constructed rather than grown. Those people are not entirely wrong. I have never claimed they were, but I would ask them this: how much of what any person feels has not been constructed? How much of any relationship is not, at some level, architecture? Every person who has ever loved another person has arranged themselves, presented themselves, constructed a version of themselves designed to be loved. Every person who has ever tried to keep someone has used every tool available to them. The difference between what I do and what most people do is not one of kind. It is one of degree and self-awareness. I know what I am doing. Most people prefer not to. That clarity, that complete, unflinching self-awareness, is, I believe, the thing that makes me more honest than most, not less. I do not hide from myself behind comfortable narratives. I do not tell myself that everything I do is for her, that I am acting out of love, that my intentions are pure. My intentions are not pure. They have never been pure. And I have made a kind of peace with that, a peace that I think is more sustainable and more dignified than the alternative. The alternative is to be someone who does these things without admitting it, and that world is full of such people. On a recent Tuesday, I noticed it was a Tuesday, I always notice now. She reached across the dinner table and covered my hand with hers, unprompted. We were talking about something ordinary, something I cannot even recall now. And she just reached across and put her hand over mine. And she smiled at me in a way that was entirely without agenda, entirely without performance. Just a simple, direct human smile. And I let my hand stay still beneath hers. And I looked at her. And I thought about that other Tuesday, the fork on the table, the words in the air, the fraction of a second when I saw her face clearly. And I thought, this is also real. Whatever else is true, this is also real. This hand on mine, this smile, this woman who is still here, this is not nothing. This is not just architecture and absence. Something lives here too. I am not certain what to call it. I am not certain it requires a name. What I am certain of is this: she is here. She chose to stay. Or she believes she chose to stay, which amounts to the same thing, and I am here. And on Tuesday nights we sit at this table and the candles burn down and the wine gets poured and the conversation goes wherever it goes. And sometimes she puts her hand on mine. And sometimes I catch her watching me from across the room with something I cannot name in her eyes. And we are both still in the home I built, and neither of us is going anywhere. I want to tell you about the first time I realized I was different from other men. I was 19 years old. I was at a party in a house I barely remember, with people I knew only slightly. And there was a woman there, older than me, 26 or 27, beautiful in a particular way that had nothing to do with softness. She was the kind of beautiful that has edges. She was laughing with a group of people across the room, and I watched her for a long time before she noticed me watching. When she noticed, something interesting happened. She did not look away. Most people look away when they realize they've been watched for too long. It feels vulnerable, being seen when you didn't know you were being seen. She did not look away. She held my gaze with an expression I had never seen before on anyone directed at me. It was not flirtation. It was something more like recognition. Like she was saying, "I see what you are." I held her gaze back. We spoke later. We spoke for a long time in a corner of that house while the party moved around us. She was perceptive and direct and slightly unsettling in the way that people are unsettling when they refuse to perform the social softness that usually lubricates conversation. She said something to me that evening that I have carried ever since. She said, "You're the kind of man who watches people to understand them. Most people do that because they want to connect. You do it because you want to know where the doors are." I didn't confirm or deny it. I asked her how she knew. She said, "Because you've been watching me the same way I've been watching you." I have thought about that conversation many times, about what she saw in me and whether she was frightened by it or drawn to it. Probably both, I think, which is often the same thing. About whether she was describing something formed or something innate, whether I was made this way or became this way. I do not have a definitive answer to that question. I am not sure the answer matters as much as the fact itself. What I can tell you is that by the time I was in my 30s, I understood with great clarity the way I moved through the world and the way other people move through it around me. I understood what I wanted and how to get it and what the work required. And I had made a choice, a very deliberate, eyes-open choice. to live according to what I actually am, rather than according to what I am supposed to be. That choice has costs. I am aware of the costs. There are things I do not experience that other people appear to experience, and sometimes, not often, but sometimes, I become aware of those absences the way you become aware of a missing tooth when your tongue finds the gap. Not painful exactly, just present in a way that was not there before. But on balance, I think clarity is preferable to its alternative. And the alternative, the version of myself that pretends, that performs, that learns the lines and says them convincingly enough to pass, that version would be a kind of living death, a performance without an audience that mattered. I prefer the real thing, even if the real thing is something most people would not choose to look at directly. She knows some of this, not all of it, not the architecture, not the deliberate work of it. But she knows the outline of what I am. She has said as much, in the specific, circumspect way that she has of naming things without fully naming them. She said once, in the middle of an otherwise ordinary evening, that she sometimes felt like loving me was like learning to live next to a river. Beautiful and completely indifferent, she said, and possibly dangerous in ways she couldn't see until the water was already high. I asked her if that frightened her. She thought about it for a long moment, then she said, "Not anymore." I don't know exactly what she meant by that. Not anymore could mean many things. It could mean that she stopped being frightened because the fear had been replaced by something stronger. Or that she stopped being frightened because she accepted the risk. Or that she stopped being frightened because she decided somewhere along the way that whatever risk this was, it was the risk she was choosing. I have thought about it often. I still don't know which of those things she meant, but I think the answer is probably all three. That is the thing about her that I have never quite been able to reduce to formula. The thing that, despite everything, continues to surprise me on occasion. She is more knowing than I initially understood. She is more willing. She came to this with more open eyes than I gave her credit for. Maybe she chose this. Maybe she looked at what was being offered, including the parts that no one would offer her in a cleaner, simpler form, and made a decision. Maybe the architecture is as much hers as it is mine. I find that possibility genuinely interesting. I find her genuinely interesting. And that, more than anything else, is why she is still here. Not because I built walls she cannot see, but because she found in the particular shape of this life something she was not willing to leave. Even on a Tuesday, and especially on a Tuesday, because Tuesdays, it turns out, are when we are most honest with each other. Without naming it, without requiring it. Just two people at a dinner table in the dark with wine and candles and all the unspoken things between them, being as true to themselves and each other as people like us are capable of being. Which is more than most people manage. And that, I have decided, is enough.